right, so welcome to day two. Here we go after a full day of presentations and ideas and technologies. Gosh, I'm so excited for day two. We've got a lot of ground to cover today. So hopefully you've had some fun with a couple of the best of sessions we've had so far. And now we move into a series of the live sessions where we're going to talk about tools and technology and policy and all that other sort of jazz. It's going to be fantastic. I did want to bring up Eric Gubera, the EVP of the Life Science Practice here at Arsenal, to also welcome him to day two. So Eric, welcome.
Good morning, Frank. It's great to be here.
It's a big day, but it's a big day in many, many regards. I thought we would start off our live sessions with just a kind of a quick kind of industry recap of some of the things that are going on that affect us, that are leading life science brands, companies, teams, you name it. This morning, it looks like the FTC is clearing the acquisition of Alexion by AZ. That's very interesting. Eric and I have some experience there in being acquired by the likes of BMS and AZ in our past. So good luck to our friends at Alexion. Exciting stuff. And I bring that up as a headline that happened this morning because I think we're all thinking about what's going on with the FTC. For folks that are maybe not following this super closely, here's the background. Recently, the FTC has moved forward and said, hey, we're going to take a closer look at some of this acquisition activity, specifically in the BioPharma sector. That's really taken a little bit of the steam out of the market caps of several of these companies in the space. We know that many budding biopharma companies, officially or unofficially, have part of their plan is acquisition, especially when you consider how difficult it is to commercialize. The idea of acquisition, especially with some of these smaller entities and emerging biopharmaceutical innovations, it makes sense to get bolted on to a bigger entity that maybe has market presence, resources, and beyond. So from an M&A standpoint, we're all wondering what this FTC statement means to us, but it certainly created some jitters, if nothing else, in the financial markets. Any thoughts on that, Eric, with what you're observing and the folks that you're talking to?
Well, I think one of the things that we have an opportunity in pharma right now is we've been driving so much innovation and have delivered so much value in the court of public opinion. Pharma is probably emerging at an, in my opinion, based on some of the data we've seen, at an all-time high. So in spite of all these external pressures that are coming in, kind of looking at bolt-on acquisitions, which really, if you think about these smaller companies, they need some of the strength to deliver on the promise of their emerging pipelines. Many of them, quite simply, lack the commercial presence and resources that some of the larger companies do. Having said that, been part of that on the smaller end, you do lose something in that transition at times as well. So there's challenges with that. But in terms of delivering on the promise of some of the innovations and technologies emerging, that business model has been successful. And I think we need to recognize that. Now, do we need some guardrails and things like that? Absolutely. But I think when you look at all these external forces that are happening, if you look at the FTC, you also have to look at a leaderless FDA, which presents some challenges as well. And I know that's a topic that I think needs to be addressed sooner rather than later. I mean, given everything that's going on and with some of the emerging challenges in the vaccine rollouts. So I think moving forward, and this is what this showcase is about today, is we need to focus on that famous adage, controlling the controllable. And one of the areas where we have an opportunity as an industry, and it's a reason why we kicked off the summit yesterday with this topic, and it's the reason why we're kicking it off today, is we have an opportunity to lead as an industry and show what great looks like when it comes to diversity and inclusion efforts within our companies, and making that a reality, not just a bumper sticker that we all put on our cars and drive around with, right? So that's what today is about.
Yeah, to lead successfully, to your point, there's the controllables that we have, and we need to make sure that we're really, really good at it. And I do believe that the last year has proven that the life sciences industry, when put in a position to achieve a significant goal, and I think largely decides that it's going to collaborate to a fair degree when it comes to that, great things can be achieved. I mean, by the end of this month, it's noted that there will be over a billion shots in arms when it comes to vaccines globally. That's incredible. A year ago, the idea of a billion shots in arms across this world was hard to fathom, but look at where we've come. So I do think that from a leadership standpoint, while we're thinking about, to your point, the leaderless FDA, at least for now, some of these FTA machinations, FTC machinations that are going on. Health and Human Services Secretary's got some opinions on things, and we have several pricing bills that are being introduced. As leaders, we are thinking about the future. We are thinking about changes that could come upon us. But I'm really excited to transition that conversation about changes that we intend to make, that we want to make, that we need to make. And there's room for better progress, that's for sure. And that's really around the people component. So Eric, I'm going to bring up Joy Monahan to the stage. Joy, welcome on behalf of Eric and I and the Arsenal Nation. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. And of course, we're talking about my favorite topic.
So Eric, you're going to join us again in a little bit. So I'm going to say we'll see you in a few minutes, but please, indulge yourself in this conversation. So Joy is the Associate Director of Legal Diversity and Outside Counsel Programs at AbbVie. Very interesting title. I can't wait to learn more about you, Joy, today. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing at AbbVie right now.
Well, what I'm doing, again, this is, what's remarkable about this is it's a newly created position, right? And when we talk about innovation and change, I mean, most legal departments do not have a specific person dedicated to this job, right? And so the fact that AbbVie, sought out building upon the successes that they've been doing for diversity and inclusion, recognized that, you needed someone full time, right? Because, yesterday when we were talking on the panel, we talk about all the different things you need to do. It's not one thing, it's everything. It's building recruitment, it's pipeline, it's how you retain people, right? It's how you, make sure you have like partners that, have the same values, different, all of that together. Again, it's not one size fits all, but you want multiple factors, or approaching this at different angles, right? Because it, and that's because, again, it doesn't always work for everyone. So you have to kind of build it out, right? So anyway, they had this program where our leader, Laura Schumacher, decided that, she recognized that there wasn't a lot of diversity in the legal profession. And so she, again, with the leadership behind her, decided that, let's see how we can, demand the change we want, right? So for our matters, what she did was she, reached out to our top spend law firms and said, we don't see as many diverse attorneys on our matters. So what we would like to do is we want to, ask you to make sure that they're diverse attorneys and, both more women and more, underrepresented attorneys and at the partner level, right? And so we've actually, and again, they started like 3 years ago, and it's really made a difference, right? Because, for years, there's always talk about, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? We need to make change, but there was no change. So what AbbVie, again, is amazing. And I know I'm not speaking on behalf of AbbVie, but I'm explaining why I wanted to be here at AbbVie is because they're actually making real change. And, we've seen on all our matters that, the law firms are actually staffing our matters with women and diverse attorneys. And again, that's really how you make change, right? You demand the change you want.
Well, that is great, and hats off to AbbVie for taking action. A big part of what we've been sharing with our community is that intentions and statements on PowerPoint slides don't really get you that far.
Exactly.
It's about time to get out the measuring stick and make sure that our behaviors and our efforts in a measured way are at least, if not exceeding, those lovely intentions that we talk about. So Joy, I wanted to hear the Joy story. So we know what you're doing today, but let's talk a little bit about your background. So, why law, why LSU? Let's have some fun and get to know you better.
Sure. Well, I'm actually from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, so where LSU is based.
All right.
And I actually always wanted to work for the government. And so I went to school in DC, Georgetown University, which I'm a huge Hoya fan too. And actually my first job out of law school was working for, of all places, HHS. I worked for the Office of the Inspector General in the Program and Evaluations, Office of Evaluation Inspection Group. And, learning about Medicare, Medicaid, all the different regulatory aspects behind it, and, were people behaving under the regulations. I decided that, it was fine, but, it was a civil service job, and I was like, I wanted to do more. So I went back to school, got a public policy degree, and actually my thesis was, because I had the connection, went and did a study on the case mix index on Medicare reimbursement. Again, how do you manipulate the data and all that? But what's curious about this is at the same time, I was an intern flunky in the United States Senate on the Judiciary Committee. And so when people ask, well, what's a fun fact about me? I say, oh, well, I'm in the documentary Ruth Bader Ginsburg because I was one of the flunkies during her confirmation hearings, and Stephen Breyer. But it was my senator that I worked for that said, you know what, you really need to go to law school. I'm like, you don't have to be a lawyer, but just go to law school and then come back and work for us. And so I went back home to LSU because it's what I could afford. And I went to law school. And you know what? I kind of still haven't been back to DC. Again, when I graduated from law school, I ended up working for a fellow judge. So again, another fun fact, I've worked for all three branches of government. And then I started practicing law. But what's interesting about this is, again, at LSU, I was the only Asian in my class. This was a long time ago. Let's see. I graduated in 97. I was the only Asian. Again, my first job was in New Orleans. Again, I was one of the very, very few Asian attorneys that worked in the Central Business District. So I was always being called upon to, again, if back then, whatever diversity groups I was, asked to speak on them. So, okay. So then Katrina hit, and then, my husband, who I've been married to, well, it'll be 27 years. And in June, I know, crazy, right? Said, well, he wanted to move to Chicago. My brother got married that fall. We came up here for the wedding. He's like, okay, it's my turn to move. Okay. And I came up here, and then, I was able to work for a very big law firm up here, and it was great. Didn't work for another one, but again, similarly, there were not a lot of Asian attorneys, and so again, on these diversity committees, not a lot of change. Then when I went to another law firm and that imploded, I decided, you know what, I don't really want to be an attorney. I didn't want to be an attorney in the first place, and so I ended up at the economic development arm for the city of Chicago. I was going to start on a project again to change, help companies like export overseas, right? And as we were there, we had a lot of strategies, again, how to increase inclusion, how do we engage more of the city, right? So inclusive economic development is, I think, the term. And I was doing that for 5.5 years. Again, it was led by our mayor of the city of Chicago. And I ended up being general counsel. So I was general counsel there for 5.5 years. And then when we had a new mayor, I was like, okay, what am I going to do next? Do I go back to practice law? And again, during this time, because diversity in law has always been important to me, I basically was doing it as a hobby. Again, different diversity committees where they're on different boards that I sit on, one for my Georgetown University, and then LSU appointed me to the National Diversity Advisory Board. And again, trying to learn what can we do to make change in various different industries, right? And then AbbVie. And so I actually didn't know, the reason I know AbbVie exists is, your story really hit home to me because it was personal, right? My son was a patient of AbbVie, during this time I was working for the mayor. And I really loved how they had so many innovations where they took very special care of the patient, right? And my son. And I was like, wow, that's remarkable that, again, a pharmaceutical would take these steps, whether it's patients and it's patient services, nurse ambassador programs. And I was like, wow, that's really neat. And they really, really care. And so then again, when this opportunity had opened up, a friend of mine had said, hey, you know what? I know you don't want to go back to practicing law, but and you're doing all this diversity and initiatives, inclusion initiatives. Why don't you take a look at them? And again, when I, called someone I actually knew was here, talked to him about the position, it was one of these things at the end of the day, I was like, you would be so perfect for this because you talk about it, you love it, you understand. And remember, this is in the legal department. So, I was a lawyer for years. I know about the firms. I'm working with the firms. Okay, perfect. I get here and here I am. But again, it's coming here. What was really attractive, again, as I said earlier, there was this programming in place, right? And it wasn't just taught because I know leading up to, well, even now, there's so many diversity and inclusion professionals that, get hired to either check a box, right? Check a box. Oh, yes, we have someone in place, but they don't really do anything. And I said, I'm not going to go someplace that's not going to do anything. And so I was a little, hesitant first, but when I got here and learned like all the different things they were doing, like very intentional, I was like, okay, let's try it out. And so I started in June. So I'm on my 10th month here, right? And during all this time, like, it's amazing. And like I said, I chose to come here because I knew they were actually doing something. And so again, not speaking on behalf of AbbVie, but I'm here because they really mean it, right? And again, going back where the idea was, we're going to use our purchasing power. We're going to use our name, our brand, our money, and we really are going to make change. We're going to demand the change we want. And so again, in the 10 months I've been here, we've changed our recruiting strategy. We've expanded our role, pipelining. We have internal training to make sure there's, no bias and we're really, really, really trying to build and create a culture where people aren't afraid to be themselves again, which is great. Mm-hmm. We want to create an environment where people are welcome. We want to create an environment where people aren't afraid, to call out bad behavior, right? Top level down, there's so many instances, employees are afraid to speak up. Well, we've been changing that. And again, that's why I just think, this is just such a great, we're leading in this area. So that's why I love being able to talk about what we do or what other people should be doing, right? Like, we want to lead by example.
Yeah. And I do believe that there are very good intentions by a lot of organizations, and we're trying to help the leaders at those organizations that, may be that catalyst to help, raise their hand to say, hey, we need to create perhaps some new roles. We've got a policy, but it feels light. Let's make some changes. So Joy, what I'd like to do is maybe just to make sure that we can deliver maximum value to everybody.
Okay.
I don't want anyone listening not to be clear on the definitions. We talk a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Can you help level set everyone so they know what each of those terms really means?
Sure. Again, diversity, and there's most people think of diversity as either gender or ethnic diversity, but there's also, again, diversity of like schools, right? Again, I serve on 2 boards of universities where when we talk about diversity, we talk about diversity of the classes that graduate, or or different backgrounds, and so again, when we talk about recruiting, it's if you go to the same schools all the time, that's not very diverse, right? It's expanding. Okay, why don't we go to other new schools, right? Diversity, again, it's very important how you define it. It's just there's a difference, right? There's a difference background, and actually, at the end of the day, every individual is diverse in their own right? They bring a bit different background, and so when people say that white males aren't diverse, well, yeah, maybe technically under the Department of Labor definitions, but if you think about their background, what their experiences are, what they've been through, there's a level of diversity on that. So I want to make sure like that's being focused on. Inclusion, I think it's a little overused now, but it's diversity, it's being invited to the dance. Inclusion meaning you're actually asked to dance, right? So when we talk about inclusion, it's okay. So we go, companies go and they hire, they're like, oh, we need to hire more diverse, again, gender or ethnic diverse people, but we don't really do anything with them, right? And yesterday, like we were talking about it, this is about people, right? They're about people and people's lives. And if you don't create an environment where they feel like they belong there, right? They belong, they're a part of it, they're contributing. Guess what? They're not going to want to stay, right? They're going to leave. And again, so then you have that endless cycle. Okay, we had diverse people, then they're gone. So let's get some new ones, but they don't stay long. So what do? Again, you really have to intentionally, figure out how do we keep these really good people and not lose them to other companies that, really want to keep really good people.
Right.
And again, equity, as we talked about, is fairness, right? We're trying to level the playing field. We're trying to give opportunities to people who may not have had that opportunities, right? Again, there's a picture where, again, it's very popular, where you have different levels of steps, to look over a fence. And, some, like if you're like me, very small, you're going to need a higher, step, right? And again, it's trying to level the playing field so that people have opportunities.
Yeah. All right. So how would you say, in your view of the industry, and I really want to keep this, like industry perspective.
Sure. Totally understand.
So just to respect all of the different companies that I've worked at and you're working at and what have you. So we'll just keep it industry level from a like maybe interesting stats or what have you. If I'm a leader at a pharma company right now and I'm really thinking about this particular topic because it's all about our people and I want to move forward with DEI in some way, how is the industry doing? Are there any cool stats I could go back to my team with to say, hey, this is why this is important. We're doing stuff, but I think we should do more. And it's because, how are we doing? Like,
so actually, if you're talking about just generally, gender-wise, we're doing pretty well, right? Like, 45% are female. At AbbVie, over 55%. So we're doing very well in gender. Diverse employees, there's some, maybe not as much. And actually the problem on that is, again, the pipeline, right? It's in this type of industry, you really need that STEM background. And a lot of, people prior to didn't really have opportunities to develop that. And again, when we talk about pipelining, again, we're going back all the way to like junior high when you realize, like, if you do well in science, there is a career in, pharma or tech. But way back then you didn't know any better, right? I became a lawyer because I wasn't very good at math. Very bad Asian stereotype, right? But again, we're really trying to invest in people, again, before they even get to high school or college, right? To let them know that that this could be opportunities for you. So eventually, not at this moment, it's the long game, right? We're playing the long game on that. But currently, to the extent that there are females, women, and minorities at pharma companies, what the issue and the problem is, they're not at the leadership level, right? Mm-hmm. And so while, yes, you may have a population of diverse workers, very, very, it's very rare that, or not very rare, but the numbers aren't good. So, I mean, you're basically like, maybe 12% at the, C-suite that are women and minority, and like even lower, when you talk about like board of director level. And so again, when we talk about what is intentional, you have to make sure that there is like a succession plan, or there are opportunities, because again, why would you stay someplace if there's no way for you to grow, right? And so I think, to me, and not just me, but my contemporaries at other pharma companies, that's really the issue. And so how do we, again, build that? How do we make sure there are opportunities for both, women or underrepresented employees?
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly been watching, and I've worked for California-based biotechs for, frankly, most of my career. And California has made some real strides. When you mentioned like the board of directors, for example, I am one of those folks that believes that great leaders, don't walk around and ignore problems until regulators make them change. I think great leaders are, always going to have, like, I identify these issues and we're working to resolve them and do what's right, not just what's regulated, especially in this industry. And that being said, I feel like at the leadership level, it's so important for organizations to create their bench, to groom their talent, to get these folks that are in the organization that can truly ascend and be able to create more impact, for the company and the patients that they serve. We've seen this in the last 10 years, both in my direct experience and observations, because I've been a hiring manager since 2.5 years out of college. I went into pharma right after college. I was a rep for 2.5 years, and from then on, I was always in management roles, hiring others. And I remember many moves that organizations were making, or managers I was hiring, that were talking about, hey, we need to make sure that our field force, has a look and competency and diversity that represents that of our customer base and the patients that we serve. But really, I haven't seen as many strong moves, at least going website by website, looking at leadership teams, that are really living up to that same promise. There are fewer people, but the percentages are they're just way, way off. And so I think it's really important for organizations to be thinking about how we doing what we can to retain top talent, period, but to also make sure that they're producing that bench for the industry and themselves, of folks that can really improve our organizations. So I want to also think about external here in a second, but if you'd like to comment on internal best practices to, in fact, groom a diverse and inclusive constituency so we can fill those leadership roles from within, any thoughts or advice that you'd give our leaders today?
Sure. And then, like you said, it's more about, it is the right thing to do, right? And again, I think, we've talked about, or there's been so much, just data that shows that there really is a business case to be made. That's made, right? Your profits are going to increase. Again, your customers are going to be happier, all that, if you have diverse people at your organization. But again, like you said, at some point, we want to see it grow in the leadership again, because then they become the faces of the companies. And again, showing like we want an internal, like you said, a demographic. You want to reflect the communities we serve, or our clients and our customer base. And so one of the things that we've done is again, when we recruit, we want to make sure we recruit really high potential diverse talent. But we also, want to make sure that once they're here, that they're like development plans, right? That they have development plans. There's really good mentorships. There are all these sponsor programs. Really, just someone looking out, just to make sure that diverse talent is not overlooked, right?
Yep.
And that's how it used to always be, right? Like if you have a really good sponsor or mentor in place, that's really how you succeed at a company. And so again, this has to be intentional, and you have to be doing it. You can't just talk about it. You just actually have to do it. And again, we have, that's been very evident. And
so let's talk about partners and this very, very topic.
Yes.
To step back and make a comment that could unnerve some people in the industry is that in the last year, with everything that's happened to our clinical and our commercial models, especially in biopharma, but medtech's included for sure, there are elements of disruption that may have evolved our industry in the last year, perhaps what would have taken 10 years. I mean, there's been a lot of evolution. We've been rethinking a lot about our clinical programs, our commercialization process, and that leads us to our partners. And we all know that the $1.2 trillion global biopharmaceutical industry is proudly and significantly powered by really great solution provider partners. We rely on them to be a force multiplier to what we do. That being said, along with all of that disruption and us thinking about new programs and new partners and new technologies and new ways of looking at data, new ways of recruiting patients, we are observing perhaps one of the most significant and prolific changes in vendor partners ever. A lot of the incumbent firms that have been working with a lot of the pharma companies are actually losing business because there are innovators that are stepping in with new solutions. But the other dynamic that isn't being talked about as much that I'd like to explore a little bit right now are the number of, in particular, some of the bigger biotech and bigger pharma companies that we've seen making these very public commitments to community, where they promise to make sure that their vendor partners are also adhering to their view on what diversity inclusion looks like, and selecting partners that may not be the typical ivory-lined castle firms that we know really well. That we're finding organizations that are in fact diverse owned, coming from hub zones and what have you. So as I kind of make that case that we're seeing a lot of this happening, that existing solution providers are actually in a very unique place. There is going to be massive changes on who's doing business with some of these companies over the next couple of years because of both the dynamics in the marketplace, but also diversity and inclusion. What might be a framework for us to think about the next time we are looking for partners to come in and help us solve a problem? Should we be looking at the companies that are on the RFP list and inspecting what are their positions on diversity and inclusion, since they're largely powering some of our initiatives?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question. Again, that is why I'm here at AbbVie, right? Because the program that I was telling you about, again, we have that ability to select the law firms, and if they, are not aligned with what we're trying to do, guess what? They're not going to get our business anymore. And as you know, in this industry, we need a lot of lawyers, right? And so That's exactly the point. And so my role again, is with our legal, with our those are our external vendors, but it has, again, multiplied, like you said, to our other functions. So where everyone is looking, for diversity suppliers, we are not going to partner with someone, even though, maybe they've done it for years, but now, again, it always comes from the top, right? Our CEO has made a commitment that we're going to make a change and we're going to drive change. And in fact, even in our company values, diversity and inclusion is one of our, key values. And with that, there's the, trickle down, pull through, all that. So any external vendor that we work with needs to either, be diverse or be on the right track, right? Like really realizing that this is very important to us, and that we're only going to work with people that have the same values. And if you don't have them, we're not going to work with you. And so to your point, if companies that don't have this as a commitment, they're going to lose out.
Mm-hmm. I think that we're in the middle of a window of some of the greatest changes to incumbent partners that we've ever seen, and a big part of what we do at Arsenal are we help life science executives be able to really level up on their decision making and their strategic outlook, and that includes capabilities assessments. And we've been talking quite a bit about you really need to think about who you're partnering with, because there's a greater visibility on the world when you're doing business with firms that perhaps don't even allude to the same commitments to community, diversity, equity, inclusion that you, Big Pharma, has on your website. For those our friends at Big Pharma that are watching this right now, it's something you really need to think about. So, Joy, as we come to the edge of our time,
Sure.
I've got to tell you, first of all, I have really enjoyed this conversation with an attorney, knowing that it's not costing me $500 an hour. This has just been amazing. But can you bring us home with just some general advice? All of our leaders are out there. They've got great intentions. They want to do the right things. Arm them with some advice on how they should be leading with diversity and inclusion in the days ahead.
Sure. And like I said, since last year with COVID and, the murder of George Floyd, again, all of a sudden this became a bandwagon thing, right? I always say that I was hired before because we were already doing this. But all of a sudden, my role became even more relevant. We talk about mistakes you're doing the wrong way. Whether you're doing this for the right reason or the wrong reason, at the end of the day, you really need to be intentional, right? So a lot of companies are going out, they're like, oh, we need to make sure we get, the metrics right, or we, our numbers are correct, or we get all this data, like, because that's, our program is actually very data driven. But then they're like, okay, we have to do everything. We have to boil the ocean. But then you get all this and they're like, well, what do you do with it? Right? Okay, we've hit everything. We've, our numbers look great. But again, they're not really doing anything with it, right? You really need to, again, have a very strategic, targeted action. Figure out what exactly are you trying to achieve, right? I mean, again, you don't have to boil the ocean. It can be, baby steps, I guess, right? But you really have to have a plan. Okay, this year we're going to do this, right? And next year we're going to grow it. And, yesterday I was listening to some of your, when I was listening to talk, I mean, yes, the term pilot, it's, it's everywhere, or pivoting again, but that's okay, right? If you've not done this before, I don't know why you wouldn't try it, right? Because then whether it's the pilot or maybe it doesn't, what one company doesn't work for another company, because again, there's no one size fits all here. But do what works for your company, and then actually, like I said, this is your program is amazing because you can go out and learn. You can learn from others, right? I mean, people come to me all the time like, what are you guys doing? And I tell them, and they're like, oh, that's so great. But again, it may not work for that company. But again, to the extent that they still want to learn, ask our peers, right? I mean, like I said, I ask other pharma companies that do similar things. And we learn from each other. It's okay, right? We don't know everything. What we're doing is great, but there's still so much more to do, right? And so when you go and learn best practices, and again, may or may not work at our company, but at least you know that there are alternatives or opportunities actually that we can, go after. So
I think that's great advice. It's important for, our industry to get outside the castle walls and get exposed to other ideas. And we say this 1,000 times, we may compete individually, but collectively is the way in the path to change the world. And with diversity and inclusion, it's just so important to network and to get these ideas. And Joy, you really helped us a lot today and helping us think about this. So
whatever you need.
Well, thank you. You gave us an opportunity to say, hey, what are the stakes? What are the situations? The advice about being intentional is just spot on. Where do you want to go? And then, of course, go ahead and execute. So, Joy Monahan, thank you. How do we keep in touch with you? Can we follow you on LinkedIn?
Sure, please do. Follow me on LinkedIn. Or my email is easy. It's joy.monahan@abbvie.com.
Very, very cool. So, hey, a bonus for following Joy on LinkedIn. When you follow her, scroll through her feed, and there is a picture of some famous athletes and Joy that you have to see. That is an epic picture. So
yeah,
a lot of fun.
All fun. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. All right, Joy. Well, hey, thank you again for everything. I'm going to bring Eric up for some more recap of the day. But Joy, thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Eric, welcome back.
It's great to be back, and what a session. And
awesome.
Kudos to Joy, just really just taking that discussion around developing and bringing and taking action and making diversity and inclusion efforts, take the next step forward. So that was outstanding.
Yeah, it's an important topic. I'm glad we covered it each day in a very important part of our people discussions, because it's always about people first. But I think that we've put everyone in the position to really understand the situation, be enticed by the opportunity, and to, I think, Joy's point, really be intentional for sure. That's great. And then go ahead and execute. So on that note, Eric, we're going to let people check out the expo area with the on-demand content and the resources and all of that other stuff. We're going to be back at the top of the hour, and we're going to have a case study. It's going to be a lot of fun to take a look at this. So as someone who graduated from the Defense Language Institute, who is a linguist, an 82nd Airborne military intelligence officer, and now EVP at Arsenal, Eric, what is lexical analysis?
Well, lexicon. So you're dealing with words, and it's the study of words, and the words, I suspect, just based on the topic, that people either use or gravitate to. So there might be some marketing component, I'm guessing, with regard to this, and how that can provide valuable insights to people engaging better with their customers. So as somebody who considers himself a lover of words and how they impact people and our experience as human beings on planet Earth, I am so intrigued and just can't wait to be a fly on the wall for that particular discussion.
Yeah, it's going to be really cool. If you're wondering, like, in this data-rich environment of BioPharma, how do we become knowledge-rich? Because there's just so much data out there. What we're going to explore in this next session is you should know about it. If you do search for anything, or you have customers that search for things that you want them to find around your company or your brand, let me tell you, you want to go ahead and check that out. So on that note, Eric and everyone else, thanks for joining us for this session. We'll see you in the next one very shortly.